Today's critique examines a market analysis piece forecasting Singapore's COE premium trends for the third quarter of 2026, weighing factors like impending policy reviews and expiring EV incentives. Now, the author clearly possesses really deep market knowledge and did some incredibly solid data gathering. But we have to jump straight into our first structural critique regarding the originality of the piece.
Yeah, we really do, because there's a huge missed opportunity here.
Exactly. I mean, to put it in perspective, it's like being told a Category 5 hurricane is about to hit. But the weatherman just categorizes it as upcoming weather. That's basically what this author's doing with a massive anomaly in the COE market.
Right. They have this startling data point right in front of them.
Yes, they note that Category A premiums hit $126,009 in June 2026.
Which is just crazy.
It is. It's barely $2,000 shy of Category B's $128,105 record from late 2025. And at first I thought, sure, prices are astronomically high. That's just standard for Singapore, you know?
Yeah, you get used to the sticker shock.
But then burying this massive convergence under a generic subheading about past 12-month trends, it implies this is just business as usual.
Elevating the unprecedented convergence of Category A and Category B premiums to the central thesis will create a much more compelling and original narrative hook.
Okay, so make it the absolute star of the show.
Precisely. The weakness here is that the current draft treats this historical narrowing of Cat A and Cat B simply as a statistical observation, just tucked inside the price trend section. It completely misses the opportunity to frame this anomaly as the primary catalyst driving the upcoming end of 2026 categorization review by the Transport Minister.
Right, because that review doesn't just happen in a vacuum. So what's the move here? Should the author just, I don't know, delete the routine historical charts entirely and jump straight into the crisis?
Well, I wouldn't delete the historical data entirely, but the suggestion is to restructure the analysis to use this specific price convergence as the foundational premise that anchors all subsequent predictions about supply and policy shifts.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for a concrete example, instead of opening with a standard graph of past 12-month trends, they should open the piece by directly highlighting that June $126,009 Cat A figure. Frame the entire article around this specific tension.
Like heavily emphasize the why.
Exactly. Write it so that because Cat A is virtually indistinguishable from Cat B right now, the government's upcoming policy review is the single most critical variable for late 2026 buyers.
I love that framing. Let's break down the underlying mechanics of why this is such an existential crisis for the market, which, the author hints at but doesn't fully exploit.
Right, the fundamental purpose of the categories.
Yeah, because Cat A is engineered to be the mass market affordable tier. It's supposed to be for standard sedans, smaller engines. And Cat B is the luxury tier, the high-performance vehicles, the large Mercedes and BMWs.
So when they collide,
Exactly.
if the entry-level paper and the luxury paper are within $2,000 of each other, the foundational logic of the two-tier market has just completely broken down.
And the author understands the cause and effect here. They mention later that the Transport Minister's review is explicitly linked to these premiums holding steady next to each other.
Right.
The issue is purely structural. If we look at how we got here, it's really about the EV power output loophole. When the Land Transport Authority raised the threshold for Cat AEVs to 110 kilowatts a few years back.
Oh, right. Then premium brands started detuning their electric models just to fit under that cap.
Exactly. So suddenly, someone looking to buy a standard mass-market Toyota Corolla is forced into a bidding war against someone buying a detuned Mercedes-Benz electric SUV. That is the engine driving this whole convergence.
It really is. The mass market buyer is being priced out of their own category by luxury buyers who are just exploiting a policy technicality.
Which is wild.
It is. Which brings us back to the narrative structure. If you start with that hurricane, the merging of these two distinct buyer demographics into one fiercely competitive category, then every subsequent paragraph in the analysis has a reason to exist.
Ah, I see.
Like, the section discussing the LTA's cut-and-fill strategy isn't just a dry list of quarterly quota numbers anymore. It becomes an exploration of why reallocating supply from future quarters is completely failing to keep these two price categories apart.
Oh, that makes the policy review section transformed from just a random upcoming calendar event into, like, the government's emergency response to the crisis you introduced in paragraph 1.
Exactly. It gives the whole piece momentum.
That framing really shifts the piece from a retrospective timeline into a forward-looking analysis. So having established that overarching policy tension, we need to dive into the specific midterm pressures, right?
Right, the demand drivers.
Because the reader's immediate question is, should I buy a car in July, August, or September of 2026? Now, the material predicts a massive demand surge in Q3, mostly driven by the rush before the EV early adoption incentive ceases in 2027.
Which is capped at $7,500, right?
Yes. And since buyers usually take about 3 months to secure a COE, Q3 is the real deadline. But then, tucked away at the very end of this section, there's a brief mention of a weakening local economy and retrenchments.
Yeah, that part felt very disconnected. Reconciling the predicted surge in late 2026 COE demand with the acknowledged signs of a weakening local economy will significantly strengthen the robustness of the market forecast.
Because right now it's just a contradiction.
It is. The weakness is that the forecast asserts strong upward pressure on premiums due to the EV rebate expiration and the car expo. But it isolates the contradictory macroeconomic reality of local retrenchments as a mere disclaimer at the end. It creates a really disjointed analytical stance.
It feels completely bolted on. I mean, the author is predicting that buyers will aggressively scramble for cars, specifically in this July to September window, while simultaneously experiencing severe economic hesitation.
Which doesn't track psychologically.
Not at all. If I'm worried about my department restructuring, a $7,500 discount on a car that requires a $126,000 piece of paper just to drive it isn't going to convince me to run to a showroom.
No, absolutely not.
So how do they fix this? Should the author just pick the stronger force like the impending rebate expiration and predict that FOMO will just override the economic fears?
I wouldn't advise ignoring the economic reality just to make a cleaner prediction. The suggestion here is to integrate this economic friction directly into the core Q3 and Q4 demand predictions to show a more nuanced, sophisticated understanding of consumer psychology.
Oh, okay. So make them clash.
Yes, force those two realities to collide right on the page. As a concrete example, they could dedicate a specific paragraph to exploring this exact tension. For instance, explicitly analyze whether the fear of losing a $7,500 EV rebate will realistically override a buyer's anxiety about local retrenchments.
Let's crunch the numbers on that tension, actually. A $7,500 rebate on a $200,000 vehicle is roughly, what, a 3.75% discount?
Yeah, mathematically, it's a marginal saving.
Right. But the author argues that the psychological fear of missing out on, quote, free government money is what drives showroom traffic.
Well, behavioral economics generally tells us the opposite when the stakes are this high. Loss aversion, specifically the fear of losing one's primary income, usually hits much harder than the prospect of a marginal discount.
That makes total sense.
Market analysis often falls into the trap of assuming perfectly rational actors who simply do the math on a rebate and execute a purchase. But if the author models out the psychological impact of tech and finance layoffs, they transition from merely listing market factors to actively interpreting them.
So they could conclude that the economy might actually dampen the panic buying?
Exactly. They could suggest that the economic downturn might actually neutralize the expected car expo price spike, which would lead to a flatter premium curve than historically expected.
Okay, but the counterweight to that, which the author does briefly touch on, is the strictly capped supply. We are looking at a drop in available Cat A COEs to just 1,119 for the quarter.
That is remarkably low.
It is, and when supply is that severely constrained, you don't need the entire market to feel financially secure. You only need 1,120 willing buyers to keep prices at record highs.
Right. It's just a numbers game at that point.
Yeah, so the author doesn't need a crystal ball to declare a definitive winner between these opposing forces, but they do need to show the reader the math. They need to demonstrate how a shrinking pool of willing buyers interacts with a shrinking pool of available COEs.
And by weighing those mechanisms against each other, the author proves they are reading the actual economic climate, not just regurgitating press releases about the EV rebate ending.
Which leads us perfectly into the conclusion. So we move from analyzing the Q3 market forces to the actual strategic advice. Then now what?
Right, the execution phase for the reader.
Let's look at how this final verdict is delivered. Because the conclusion advises the reader to buy now in July or August to lock in those EV rebates before the Q4 rush. But in the very next breath, it suggests waiting for a potential market dip in early 2027 following the categorization review.
It's very conflicting.
When I read that, I genuinely felt paralyzed. I'm being told to buy immediately and to wait patiently. It feels like giving a driver directions to turn left and right simultaneously.
Structuring the final recommendations as distinct, profile-based buyer strategies will dramatically enhance the actionable value of the conclusion.
So break it down by who is reading it.
Because the market itself is heavily fragmented. The weakness here is blending the immediate Q3 buy now urgency and the 2027 wait for policy changes into a single sequential narrative.
Right. It just blurs everything together.
And it risks leaving the reader ambivalent about which specific path applies to their personal situation.
But doesn't segmenting the advice make the conclusion too long? I mean, if I'm writing a concise, hard-hitting market forecast, adding multiple buyer profiles might muddy the waters or turn a sharp conclusion into, like, a sprawling textbook-style matrix.
Actually, segmentation increases readability. People naturally skim until they find the information that applies specifically to their own wallet.
Oh, that's true. I definitely do that.
Right. A wall of text containing contradictory timelines is what really muddies the waters. So the suggestion is to explicitly segment the final verdict based on buyer priorities, transforming the conclusion into a strategic decision matrix.
How would that look in practice?
For a concrete example, they could create clear subheadings for different buyer profiles. Write a Strategy A, the EV adopter section that emphasizes the mathematical urgency of buying specific models, like the BMW iX3 or the Mercedes-Benz GLB, before the 2027 incentive cutoff.
Oh, I see. And then contrast that immediately with a second profile, like Strategy B, the patient pragmatist.
Yes, exactly.
And that section would outline why waiting for dealers to react to the new COE categories in early 2027 could yield a significantly more affordable internal combustion engine vehicle.
Perfect. By doing this, the author acts as a mirror, essentially asking the reader which one of these risk profiles actually represents your situation.
Because a buyer eyeing a luxury electric SUV obviously has a completely different timeline than a family holding out hope that a standard sedan will become affordable again.
Right. And this approach also forces the author to map macro-level policy changes directly onto micro-level consumer decisions. The patient pragmatist profile allows the author to explain the actual mechanism of a policy change in practice.
How so?
Well, when new categories are announced by the LTA, dealers don't just continue bidding blindly, they freeze their bids.
Ah, yes. Let's explain why that freeze happens for our audience. Dealerships operate on really tight margins and high inventory turnover. If the transport minister announces new criteria that might push luxury EVs back into Cat B, dealers are not going to aggressively bid for Cat A COEs.
No, it's way too risky.
Right. They don't want to get caught holding high-priced inventory if the new policy suddenly floods the Cat A market with cheaper traditional vehicles. That hesitation creates a temporary vacuum in the bidding cycle.
And that temporary vacuum is the exact window of opportunity the patient pragmatist is waiting for. It's infinitely more actionable to read, if you are willing to wait, target the first bidding session immediately following the announcement because dealers will hold back, rather than reading some vague platitude about future opportunities in 2027.
It's so much more specific. And conversely, for the EV adopter, the matrix clarifies the brutal reality of their specific situation. The $7,500 rebate is vanishing. The Cat A supply is hovering around 1,000 units. The huge car expo is arriving in September to suck up any remaining demand.
The window's closing.
Fast. If you want that electric BMW, the math dictates you sign the papers in July or August, period. By giving the reader separate sets of directions based on their actual destination, you are no longer telling them to turn left and right at the same time.
It fundamentally transforms the purpose of the piece. The goal of this analysis isn't just to prove the author understands LTA's historical data.
It's to help a reader execute a massive financial decision in a highly volatile window. A decision matrix approach elevates the author from a market commentator to a trusted strategic advisor.
I love that. All right, let's cleanly recap the 3 critical structural pivots we've mapped out for this material today. First, anchor the entire narrative on the unprecedented Category A and Category B price convergence. Use that $126,009 anomaly as the central thesis for the upcoming policy review, rather than burying it as a routine statistic.
Right.
Second, synthesize the conflicting forces of the Q3 EV rebate rush and the slowing local economy into a single nuanced prediction. Show the work on how job insecurity collides with a $7,500 incentive. And third, split the final conclusion into distinct, profile-based buyer strategies like the EV adopter versus the patient pragmatist, so the reader receives targeted, highly actionable advice.
We highly encourage the author to implement these structural shifts. These are not minor tweaks. They will fundamentally change how the reader interacts with the forecast. We would love to see the revised material, so please submit it back in for a follow-up critique once those changes are applied.
A great market analysis doesn't just look out the window and report that a storm is coming. It hands the reader a map, a compass, and a very specific set of instructions on how to navigate the impact. Thank you for joining us for this critique.